Hello and welcome to ShePack. Today I'm joined by Jessica Lopez, diversity and inclusion leader and business student at Coastline College. In today's episode, we're discussing Beyond Limits, triumphs over physical disability and chronic illness. Jessica, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome. How have you been, my friend?
I've been really good. I'm really excited to be here, and I've seen a lot of, your work, like on LinkedIn, so I'm excited to, work with you and be on your podcast. It's really awesome.
Well, the feeling is mutual, and I cannot wait to share your story. So diving right into that, share with our listeners about your background and a bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I'm Jessica. I am, like you said, I am a business student, a disability inclusion professional, and I was born without hands and feet. So, I was born with a very physical disability, and I also live with chronic illness. And I think those dynamics of having something that is super visible and also a disability that is like completely invisible have really given me a unique perspective in life, and it's really helped me kind of navigate the world. It's also helped me kind of like see things from a different perspective. And I think that was something that I think has been a benefit to, a lot of my work, going into school and beyond. And those kind of dynamics led me to be, a strong disability advocate. I've noticed that there's a lot of systems in place that are kind of like designed to be, the way they are. There's a lot of traditions, institutions kind of do things the way they always have done. But now that we're kind of like moving, forward into almost like the middle of the 21st century, we're starting to realize those perspectives of, what it's like to be, someone who's a minority or someone who's disabled. And I think disability, at least for myself, disability impacts every aspect of my life. And I think that most disabled people will say the same thing. And I think those experiences that I've had have really led me to be a big disability inclusion advocate. I've, struggled to get accommodations in school, and that's why I wanted to kind of like build, my leadership within that. I joined student government in my college, and I'm now president of student government. I formerly worked at Diversibility, which is a disability pride company. I interned at the Department of Labor over the summer, and I've done a wide range of like consulting things and workshops and trainings for disability inclusion and for companies who are interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, I think it's so awesome, your advocacy work. And, regardless of whatever situations that we are presented in life, they certainly have not been a hindrance to you and the things that you have been doing, and just breaking down barriers is really how I'm seeing it. So, and obviously living with a chronic illness on top of physical disability can present its challenges. So help us understand, what are some of the day-to-day challenges that you do face, and how do you manage it?
I think the first thing people think is like, what can you do? Like, you don't have hands. Like, how do you navigate the world doing that? And, I always say I can do almost anything that anybody else can do, with the exception of perhaps riding a bike. But there's adaptive bikes out there, so I can probably do that too at some point if I want to. But for the most part, I kind of navigate the world, and I do things in my own way. I've learned to adapt to what I have. Since I was born without hands and feet, I've kind of learned to use what I have. I can write, I can draw, I can do pretty much anything that anyone else can do. And I think that has really helped me kind of understand, like, having a disability is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a part of who you are. And at least for myself, I think it was really empowering to realize that my disability is not just like something that I live with. It also makes me who I am as a person, and it made me stronger. It made me more creative. I figured out how to, do things in very different ways. I've also come up with like inventions that, just don't exist because they've helped me, do things. And I know to, help others as well if I can like get them out there. And I think that is the biggest thing is that like my physical disability doesn't present a lot of barriers, but I do have a chronic illness, and that does present a lot of barriers. I became sick at the age of 10 years old, and I was someone who actually went to a performing arts school. So I did singing, dancing, and drama in my school, in elementary school, and then everything just kind of stopped when I became chronically ill. And like up until that point, I was like, a straight A student. I was, getting a little bit older. I wanted to start like volunteering, joining student government. And all of those plans just got put on hold. And I was just kind of bedridden for most of, my teenage years. I didn't really have a lot of friends because I wasn't really able to go out places. And that also made me fall back in my schooling as well, just because I wasn't able to keep up. And so I was put into independent study, but even with that, like, my body had its own schedule, and that was just, like, it's really hard to navigate in the world when the world has a schedule and your body wants to do something different. And that meant that I ended up graduating high school 4 years late, because of that, just because I wasn't able to finish school. During my time in high school, I started requesting accessible education in the form of, like, distance learning. And I was like, maybe this could be a possibility. This was before the pandemic, and I was like, I don't even know if this will work, but maybe this is a possibility. And they were just kind of like, that's not a thing. Nobody does that. We can't do that for you. And we all kind of know what happened next. Like, the pandemic hit, my high school, or the entire country, was put into online education, including my high school. And I ended up finishing 2 years of high school in less than 4 months, because I was able to just do it at my own pace and, like, log off when I'm not feeling up to it. And that was really important to my success. And I think that helped me realize, like, I had been kind of not really blaming myself, but, like, my body was holding me back, or so I thought. But once I realized that I could actually, like, finish high school, having the right systems and support structures in place, I realized that it's not necessarily my body or my chronic illness that's holding me back. It's the institutions or systems that are set in place. And that was something that was really eye-opening, and I wanted to make sure to share that story with people, because I know there's a lot of disabled people out there who have very similar stories.
Yeah, no, I think that's, it's so interesting. Just the timing of making this request of just institutions that are holding you back. And then, hey, look, pandemic hit, and what the effect and impact, positive impact that it had on you. The other thing you mentioned was you ended up creating inventions. So even with whatever's life's challenges that it gave you, you decided to take creativity, because you had an arts background and leveraging a lot of those skills. What were some of the inventions that you created? I'm very curious.
Yeah, one of the first things is kind of like a TMI, but, like, for myself, I don't really have the physical hand that I can hold, like, deodorant. So, like, there's no way for me to put on deodorant. And so I kind of created the idea of, like, a stand where it would be, like, maybe 4 inches tall, and it would have, like, a little holder that would wrap around deodorant, so I can put it in there, and then there's kind of a flat platform, so I can hold it, like, on the table, and then put it on myself. That's something that I've actually seen corporations work on, since I thought of it, so I guess other people have thought of it too. They kind of beat me to the bush, with that one, but I think that really shows that there's a lot of ideas out there that either exist that somebody else obviously needs. Like, somebody else needed it, so they created it. And I needed it, but I didn't have the means to create it. And I think, like, building those opportunities to create those inventions and, bringing disabled people into the workforce, into, like, product teams is really important, because I guarantee they're going to have ideas for inventions and things that you've never thought of, and you won't have those ideas if you won't, bring them into your leadership team. So I think, those inventions and those creations have really helped me kind of, like, navigate the world, and I'm starting to see that also come out as well, in a lot of, there's adaptive fashion, for people with disabilities, and there's so much, work that's being done, but there's also more work to be done as well around that stuff.
Well, no, and like I said, I think it's so awesome that you take, life has challenges, and instead of allowing it to hold you back, whereas so many of us, it's, when we run into a wall, we just, sometimes I can even sit down and just have a pity party for myself. But what I love is it's like, not only am I going to continue to break through these barriers, I'm going to create my own inventions. I don't care if someone's even created it. That means I was onto something. So how do you feel like that's had an influence on how you've experienced and navigated the world?
I think it's really helped me, like I said, it's really helped me, like, share, ideas that, people might not have thought of otherwise. It's also helped me, like, within my advocacy work. I am president of Coastline Associated Student Government. my college is Coastline College. I think going into that kind of system, I just wanted to have like a resume booster. It was something that I wanted to do when I was younger and I wasn't able to. But as I spent more time in it, I realized like this is my place to like share my story and leverage my unique experiences, and I won't have like that opportunity anywhere else. And my college has been very unique in the fact that it's very supportive of that, including like, the administration of the college. They've really been supportive of my advocacy. And so my creativity and kind of like the things that I think could be improved within the education system, I've been able to implement some of those within my college. And a lot of that has to do with like, you gotta network, but then a lot of it also has to do with like telling a personal story. And so one of the things that I ended up doing in student government was I worked on a disability inclusion resolution, and I passed it within my student government. And I took it to all of the constituency groups within my community college, and I said, this is my story. This is like the experience of students with disabilities. They graduate at a rate that is half that of non-disabled students. This is what they need to be more successful, and this is what we can do to make them feel welcome within these institutions. Because I found that a lot of students and employees want to work and they want to go to school, but they get pushed out because the system just pushes them out for whatever reason. It's not supporting them. So I passed a resolution and I kind of shared that story, and I think that really helped make an impact. My community college ended up installing a ramp for commencement for the first time in its history after I passed my resolution. And that was, I had no idea it was going to have that kind of impact. But that's like the power of just kind of like sharing a story and coming up with ideas to work with people and, using creativity, like writing skill to write that resolution. Afterwards, I ended up taking it to the state, the California state level, and I passed it there as well. So it'll be impacting the California community college system as a whole. So yeah, I think that really shows the testament of like, if you have the right support system behind you, you can do so much. And I had a great college that has been supportive of that. And also, sharing your story personally is really important too. And, all of those creativity, the work that goes into that is really important as well.
Yeah, I would also say your resilience going into it is just, it's amazing. You're taking, you're identifying that, hey, I've hit a roadblock and I'm going to make people aware of what that impact is. And I think going through and going to your constituent group and then seeing the impact later of having these ramps that are installed during commencement and then taking it a step further at the state level of making sure that these things are implemented. It's like, it's an amazing story. You talk about your support system and how, your college has been a huge support system and advocate for you. What about, tell us about your support system with your family and your close friends. How have they continued to support you throughout your journey?
I think one of the most surprising things that I share, that a lot of people are excited to hear about is like, when I was in elementary school, I did not get bullied for my disability at all. Like, that was not something that happened. I did go to kind of a smaller elementary school, but I think my school administration, they did really great about reaching out to parents and to students to say like, hey, there's, a disabled student, she has a very, very rare disability, and so if your kid, encounters her, tell them to say hi and, introduce yourself to her. And that was something that I experienced a lot in my elementary school life was, I'd be going, from one class to the other, going to the playground, and kids would come up to me and they'd be like, hi, Jessica. And I'm like, hi, I don't know who you are, but hi. And that was a really good testament of the fact that they were working to be inclusive of me, and making sure that kids know how to interact with someone with a disability. And I think that's where it starts. You have to talk to your kids about people with disabilities. If you encounter someone with a disability, they might likely stare, and that's okay. But just saying like, hey, this is their disability, they use a wheelchair, and they were, maybe they were born that way, and that makes them a little bit different. The same way that someone might have blonde hair versus brown hair. And I think explaining those things to kids is really important, and also exposure as well, because there can be a tendency to avoid people with disabilities. Like, don't look at them, just look at the other way. I don't want to stare, so I'm just going to go the other way. And that can also alienate people with disabilities as well. But then, like, once I kind of, became chronically ill, a lot of my support system went away. Most of my friends just kind of, like, disappeared. They didn't really talk to me. And I think that's something that's common for people with chronic illnesses. And so I became really isolated within my teen years. I didn't really have that experience of, like, prom or any of the things that I would have had if I wasn't chronically ill. And so a lot of my support system was really like my mom. She was, one of the only people who really fully, wholeheartedly, believed, my chronic illness and understood the depth of how serious it was. Whereas a lot of people kind of like thought, like, oh, just like push through it and you'll be fine. And just sometimes it doesn't work like that. But now that I've kind of, gone past that, I've found a really incredible support system within my community college. I found, advisors and counselors who have been really supportive of, my goals and my experiences, and helping me get to the next step. And, there have been people who have helped me along every step of the way within my education career and my career as well. That if I hadn't had those people, I don't think I would be, finishing my associate's degree and transferring to university, at all. And I think that's really important, is to have people who really care about, like, what you're doing and what you care about. And I think I've also experienced that in the workforce as well. Last summer I interned at a company called Elation, and they are a tech company based in Silicon Valley. And I had a really great mentors over there who were really supportive, and, they helped me, like, bring in my passions within my internships. I was able to work with them on, like, posting about Disability Pride Month in July and marketing, to, disabled customers. And a lot of that, I think, is really impactful as well, because I was able to, like, experience the corporate world. I don't have any sort of connection to that, but I was able to, like, learn how that works and still bring my passions into that. And I think it's really important, like, if you want to support disabled people, or if you are disabled, just start where you're at. No matter what you're doing, there is a way to bring disability into the conversation, whether it's like maybe we should host an event or post a picture about it, or, whatever it is. Just start where you're at. And I think that really goes a long way.
Yeah, there's so much in that to even unpack. I think one, I want to touch on, even when you were in elementary school and how inclusive and accepting other children were, and even highlighting, to those listeners who have kids, including myself, of just making sure, like, the one piece, and, you don't even think about this, where it's like, oh, people have a tendency, like you said, to not even look at somebody, not realizing when you're not acknowledging a person, you're making them feel alienated. And nobody wants to feel that way. We're all human beings. We all have feelings. And just making sure, like any other person, to be accepting and open and sharing love. The other piece that you had also spoke to was, your chronic illness, how it hit you in your teen years, and you unfortunately did lose some of your friends. Now, for those of us who are not familiar with chronic illnesses, what are some of those symptoms that can impact someone? Can you share more about that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the chronic illness. There are like thousands of chronic illnesses, and they can impact you in so many different ways, whether that's like fatigue, they can impact your concentration at work or your memory, or it can be more physical as well. A lot of times people might have internal health issues. Maybe sometimes they need to have like surgeries, or they need to have like, implants put into them to keep them alive. And a lot of those chronic illness symptoms are not visible. And I think that's something that we have to pay attention to, is like, even though you can't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. And so, like, when I first became chronically ill, I would explain to people, like, I'm chronically ill, that's why I'm not at school. And they'd be like, well, you look fine. It's like, I look fine, but that, okay, thanks. But that doesn't really help me feel better. I mean, I'm still, nothing really changes, And so I think a lot of the barriers within the workforce, at least, can relate to at least having those accommodations just going into the building. Making sure that your workforce has elevators available, making sure that you have an evacuation plan for disabled employees if there's an emergency. A lot of employers do not have those evacuation plans at all. And so that means if I were in a 5-story building and if there was a fire, everybody else would evacuate and I would have to wait for a firefighter to come get me, and that is extremely dangerous. And so having those systems in place, as well as other accommodations like flexible work, making sure to allow people to go to doctor's appointments. If someone's currently ill, likely is they're going to doctors a lot more often than you think, and there's just no way around that. And as well as just accommodations, at the desk, making sure that there's the right technology available. But I think a lot of employers don't realize is that accommodations, most of them don't cost anything. And this is something I can speak to as from my internship at the Department of Labor. They did a study several years in a row, and they reached out to different employers to double check, how much has it cost you to accommodate your disabled employees? What they found was, I believe 56% of accommodations cost absolutely nothing, and that is hugely impactful because that really shows that it's more about flexibility and your manager having the right mindset to accommodate whatever flexible things that they need, as well as just, making sure to be supportive of what they need. And then those costs that do happen, the vast majority of them are $500 or less as a one-time cost. And so that's something that employers don't realize. It's I don't want to hire someone because what if I have to, do something that costs $20,000? That is vast majority of cases, that is not what's going to happen. And I think if employers realize that, they might be more inclined to hire people with disabilities.
Oh, yeah. Well, even hearing from you just some of the environmental and institutional barriers that can hinder somebody's performance, from, not having the right technology to not having the right emergency exits with ramps, and how it can really hinder from going to the doctor's appointments if you have a chronic illness, to, other facets. The other piece that's so interesting that you had touched on is just some of those misconceptions that employers and society can have about individuals, talking about the cost that people think that are associated with supporting some of those instances. How do you feel like we can work collectively to challenge these stereotypes and promote a more inclusive and understanding society and workplace?
Yeah, I think the first thing is a lot of employers already do training for, managers who are coming in. They might touch on a range of things. They might not touch on accessibility as one of those things. The other thing is that training only goes so far if you're not really enforcing those policies, which means that you have to have policies in place from the top down, all the way up to your CEOs and executives who are saying, we care about disability inclusion and we need to invest time and funding and recruiters into recruiting people with disabilities, and promoting them and making them managers as well. And so I think that the next step is making sure that there is some sort of disability inclusion plan within your organization, and outlining that. And if you're struggling on how to draft that, especially if you're not really finding that there is a disabled person nearby who can help you, there are plenty of disabled consultants, such as me and a lot of others who are willing to, help you write those out and implement them. And so, once you create that plan, it's really important to make sure that that's executed, and making sure that it's not sticking to one person. Because what I found is that there are companies who will start to do this work, but it's usually because one person is championing it. But if they move on, then the whole thing just kind of collapses. So it's really important to institutionalize it and embed it within your culture. And the last thing I think is it's really important to celebrate disability culture. There are over 1 billion disabled people in the world. That is a very large percentage of people who are, living and, they're probably walking by you and you don't even realize it. 90% of people with disabilities have invisible disabilities, so a lot of times you're not actually going to see it. And I believe 25% of Americans are disabled. So 1 in 4 people are disabled. So if you're finding that you're your metrics are saying that you don't have a lot of disabled people in your workforce, you have to kind of think about why that is. Is it because you're not hiring them, or is it because maybe they're afraid to like disclose their disability because of the culture? And how can you kind of like reduce those barriers? And like once you start to work on that, it's really important to celebrate people with disabilities. July is Disability Pride Month, which is really like about celebrating the culture of, disabled people who have invented things and who have been musicians. And you'll find that there's quite a lot to it, that we don't realize. And so kind of celebrating and elevating people with disabilities is really important. And also making sure that that's known within your company, but also known to your customers as well, and marketing that work as well. And saying like, hey, we care about disabled people, because you'll probably get more customers as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an action to those of us who, when we're thinking and looking about diversity and inclusion, making sure that we're looking at it with a holistic lens and identifying, like, are we really covering our bases, and are we truly being inclusive to those that have any physical disability, including chronic illnesses? And then just making sure that you do have the policy and the writing, and knowing that there's actual consultants that are out there who can help you to overlook your entire strategy to see if there are things that are missing. And, obviously, based off the challenges that we discussed and even the impacts of institutions and things of that nature, tell us more about how has this empowered you to advocate for change and make a positive impact in creating that more inclusive and accessible space for yourself as well as for others?
It was not on purpose. When I was trying to get through my high school years, all I cared about was just trying to graduate high school. I was not even going to think about, like, what am I going to do next? Like, what career do I want? I just didn't have the capacity to think that far because I was just trying to get to school. But, like, once I did get to school, I think realizing the fact that there's a lot of opportunity to include people with disabilities and restructure how we think about the work and education is really vital. And for myself, I think that was kind of like a light bulb moment where it was like institutions have the ability to accommodate. A lot of times they just don't know how, or they're just not willing to put that investment of time or funding into it. And that made me realize, like, I know that there's a lot of other people with disabilities who have very similar stories, and I want to, like, get out there and share that with the world, and see what I can do to change, the systems that are in place so that, people don't have to graduate at the age of 22 from high school like I did. And that was a lot of years out of my prime years that were completely lost because my education system just didn't care. And I think that was something that I wanted to do something to make sure that didn't happen again. But then I was like, but how am I going to do that? Like, disability advocate isn't a normal career path. Like, how do you do that? And so I just kind of like went from there. I discovered like a social media coordinator position at a company called Disabilities. And I'm like, maybe I should apply. It's remote. We'll see what happens. And I just kind of went from there. I built a great community and network of other disabled professionals who are either public speakers or consultants, or even just like within, random industries who are doing work within their, organizations, whether it's like in tech or within the aerospace industry. There's a lot of room and a lot of people who are doing the work wherever they are. And I just kind of realized, like, I can do disability inclusion no matter where I go, and I can do that advocacy, no matter what career path I would go down. And so I got my marketing internship at Elation, and I discovered, like, I really love the corporate side of things. And I think that's a really great way to also, like, do that leadership and build that disability inclusion as well, because corporations are huge and there's a lot that can be done to improve things as well. So, yeah, it's been quite a journey, but I think it's really impactful when you just kind of, like I said, you start where you're at, and you kind of figure things out. Like, you just kind of, see opportunities as they come, and you think like, hey, maybe they could have done this to include disabled people, or maybe they could have done that. And I think, like, throwing out those suggestions and seeing what sticks, you'll find something to advocate, for, whatever disability inclusion idea that you have.
Yeah, well, I love it because you're pulling in your passion so early in of identifying that, maybe there isn't a role for advocacy, but that's a gap. And even going into taking these experiences of finding these opportunities in these different internships and jobs that, hey, I'm also identifying in the corporate system that there's a gap and taking advantage of that. I mean, you had talked about Adulation. You were able to work with them and start creating posts and really it's not even asking for permission, but even bringing to their attention, which you had mentioned, my last question as we start to wrap up, Jessica, is obviously this month is we're celebrating National Disability Employment Awareness. And in a world full of possibilities, what mark do you dream of leaving as a trailblazer for future generations of empowered women?
That is quite a challenge to take on by myself. I think one of the biggest marks is that I want to make sure that students who are going into the employment space, that they know that they can also advocate wherever they are. And so one of the biggest marks I want to leave on the world is opening up those doors so other people can do similar work. But outside of that, I think one of the biggest things that I want to impress on people is the fact that disability is kind of everywhere. It impacts every aspect of the world, and every diversity issue is also a disability issue because you can be a minority and disabled. You can be Hispanic and disabled. You can be LGBTQ and disabled. And all of those intersections of other advocacy work that's being done, it also impacts disability, and disability impact those movements as well. And so one of the biggest marks I want to leave on the world is just kind of impressing on the employment sector that it's really important to think about how you're impacting people with disabilities and kind of start thinking outside of the box. Kind of as you call attention to companies who do have more disability inclusive culture, they find that they have higher revenue, they find that they have more profit, and they also find that they have more retainment. So if they have strategies in place, they will keep their disabled employees. And I think that's one of the things that employees are afraid of, is if I get hired, are they going to fire me because I'm, having some health issues? And a lot of that has to do with the awareness of employers' side, which is that if you do it right, you're going to have very loyal disabled employees within your institution who are going to be very excited to stay with you. And so that will actually increase your retainment. And if you hire disabled people, you will have more loyal employees than you would have had otherwise. And so that's something that I want to, kind of leave that mark on the world. But I also want to make sure that, there's a way of building community and making sure that the disability community is not just isolated on its own. I found that there's a lot of ideas that come and go, but a lot of times they're just not really implemented just because one way or another ideas can be fragmented. There can be advocacy work based on different disabilities. There can be advocacy work based on a lot of different things, but I think it's really important to kind of think about all of the different variances of disability, and, how that all kind of ties into, the same message, and the same goals. And I think the biggest thing that, I want to, leave on the world is that women with disabilities are powerful women and they can do so much. And I think I'm not an exception. I'm not someone who's a high achiever. I'm just someone who's doing what I'm able to do now because I have the systems in place. And so I think that's something that a lot of other disabled people will find true for them once they have those systems in place as well. And the last thing is, anybody who kind of wants to, find opportunities, I think it's important to not hold yourself back, to be maybe I'm not the right person to lead this initiative, but I always think why not me? I have the idea, I have the passion, just why not me? And so I think it's really important that other people kind of start to think that. It's am I really qualified for that? Am I good enough for that? It's push those things aside and just think about, hey, you have the idea, you have the drive, just why not you? And I think that's something that been really life-changing, at least for myself, to be like, not holding myself back from other opportunities by just going for it and applying to things and, doing different things that I never thought I'd be doing.
No, I love that. I love that. It's a great reminder to all of us that you are good enough and you can break through barriers. Watch and see. And I think just the awareness that you are building out on the, those individuals with chronic illness or physical disabilities, that those things are not limitations to you. You can get creative. You can create policy. You can become more involved at the state level, at the world level. Jessica, this has been amazing. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And as we wrap up today's session, let's remember that in supporting one another, we amplify our strengths and break down barriers. So go out there, champion for your dreams, as you just heard from Jessica, empower your peers, and continue to shape a future where every woman realizes her true potential. Until next time, see ya.